For participating. So Luciano and I met initially while he was at University of Utah as a researcher and doing some work there. He has gone on and done a lot of other things. So my typical introduction for the speakers is basically just telling everyone to go check them out on LinkedIn. So I'll do the same thing, but Luciano has an amazing background. I'll let him also give a little bit more of his background. So without further ado, Luciano, you can take the floor, and you got a presentation you can go through. So we'll do about 10 or 12 minutes of presentation and then jump into some Q&A and discussion.
Thanks, Taylor. So this is going to feel like drinking from a fire hose for sure. I've got a interval clock in front of me that I'm going to go 30 seconds per slide so I can get through all 25 in the 12 minutes we have. But my background is I'm the founder and CEO of Imperatos. So we're economists and data scientists. We're focusing on customer journey intelligence that's built around lifetime value. I'm also the Chief Data Science Learning Officer at Blockchain Trading Alliance, where I teach blockchain data science and research, formerly at the University of Utah and Westminster, where I taught econ and data and research courses. The purpose of this presentation is to make the case to you that lifetime value is the most important metric that teams can use in their job. And I'm using the term teams here specifically because I know marketing drew a lot of people in. But one of the benefits, one of the unique benefits about lifetime value as a metric is that it affects every single activity that the brand is doing. So it affects marketing activities, sales activities, product activities, and customer experience activities. And it should be guiding all of those. And it really shows, as far as the metric, and I'll get into the formal definition in a minute, but it really shows the net effect of all of those efforts across the customer journey. So that's one of the things that's really important, because marketing teams often get very siloed at the front of the funnel, and they see some of what they're doing, but they really don't see how that translates 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line into value for the brand overall. So this lecture should, by the end of it, help you successfully get started with lifetime value and fuel profitable growth. You'll see down here in the bottom left, I include a lot of links. I've made these slides available. You can grab them on your own from Taylor. But if you follow this link in particular, only 42% of brands know their lifetime value. And I think that's actually a pretty high overestimate. By the end of this, everyone should be able to walk away and do some very quick calculation to figure out your lifetime value, because at the highest level, all you have to do for a simplistic calculation is take revenue and divide it by the number of your customers. That's your starting base point. It's not where you should stay, but there's no reason that 100% shouldn't have that simple metric ready to go. So there's 3 parts to the presentation. I'm going to define lifetime value, then I'm going to explain its use cases and pitfalls, and then I'm just going to link to a fully worked example. These slides are a abridged version of a deck that's available through my LinkedIn, through SlideShare, and on the Imperatos YouTube channel. So if you want this version of the deck, that link down there, links.imperatos.com/Midday Connect LTV will give you these slides. But if you want the full deck, you can email me, or you can get them through the link that's on the YouTube channel. If you just go to youtube.com/Imperatos, it's the first video that pulls up. It's 2 hours long, so this is a very abridged version. But it walks through that in detail, that case study. So let's go quickly and define lifetime value. So I'm going to come at this from a very high level. I'm coming at it as an economist. My PhD is in economics. And this is something that I started studying in economics and realized that this was not really a used metric in organized brands at the time. That's changed. I'm really encouraged by how much I'm seeing brands turning to this. E-commerce really seemed to lead the way on it. There was a revival of this metric, but it's actually quite an old metric. But there's 2 ways to define it. You can define it either as the total economic value of the customer over their lifetime relationship by focusing on revenue, or you can focus on profit. The difficulty with focusing on profit is that it requires that you have good cost accounting, which most brands do not. You can't typically associate the costs that are incurred at an individual customer level, which would be the most ideal situation. Often it can't even be assigned at the product level. So if you have to, you go off of revenue, but in an ideal situation, it would be based on profitability. This involves one of the most complicated things to measure, which is willingness to pay, and then you add a time dimension to it. So this is another reason why brands have been hesitant to jump on this metric despite its power. There are three components. At the highest level, there are three components that should be in every lifetime value calculation. And this is where I see the first movers here are focusing only on the monetary value. It's a great first step. It's usually the biggest portion, but if you want to start to refine what total value means, you have to not just look at monetary value, you have to look at non-monetary value. And I'm going to define all of these in a moment. And then with that baseline of both monetary and non-monetary value, you then have to predict into the future for the lifetime component. So let's go into each one. So monetary components are usually historical, and they are RFM approach. This is the most popular. You've got that link down there to the RFM model. This stands for recency, frequency, and monetary value. You basically look at each of your customers and say, how often have they bought, what do they buy, and how much does it bring us? There's an easy way to do this scoring in an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet if you want to do it that way. And then that assigns a value that you can start to track over time. Seasonality and the industry as well really affect this. So if you're an e-commerce organization that does 75% of your yearly revenue in the fourth quarter, you have to really take that into consideration as you do your modeling, especially when you move into the future portion that I'll get to here in a moment. As far as non-monetary goes, I actually think this is one of the most important for driving the long-term lifetime value. So it's really easy with marketing, or I should say it's easier with marketing and sales efforts to continually generate interest in the public to purchase goods and services. It's really hard to keep those customers and keep them happy over a long period of time. I know that there is a huge amount of uproar right now just with some of the big traditional banks because of the way that they've handled things like the PPP and stimulus checks, things that were largely forced on them. That's going to have a huge effect on their long-term value. And a lot of it is going to be captured, if they want to look at it, in the non-monetary word-of-mouth communication that's happening in social media and between individual people. So two metrics can help you with this. They're usually survey-based, net promoter score and overall satisfaction. You can model some of these based on product use behavior, but the easiest way to get this is to just ask them. If you've not studied net promoter score, there's a great link down here to an HBR article that goes into net promoter score, and it's based on the idea that word of mouth is still the most powerful marketing channel out there. So if you have that monetary and non-monetary baseline, now the question is, how do you forecast and then discount to the present, that future component? Which if you're a commodity type product, or you're a monthly SaaS, and you have to think about a 5-year or 10-year time horizon, then most of the value that you're going to capture is in the future. It's not even in your past relationship with them. This is related to churn and rebounding. So rebounding is when someone has churned and then they come back. But those two things are really important to understand as you create some kind of forecasting model that includes both monetary and non-monetary. And then you forecast that out to some time horizon, and then you discount that value back to the present. The biggest issue with LTV is that you're going to end up having to use whatever data you have available. This often is why marketing teams are pioneering this, because they have a lot of the cost data that's really useful for the profitable decision making. They can also track a lot of their own behavior very well with digital data because of all the digital platforms. But it should not stop at marketing. LTV has the highest ROI of any metric because it captures the whole relationship across the entire customer journey. And you should be using it, therefore, to inform all of your decisions because of its impact. So let's talk about a couple use cases and some pitfalls. People ask, when is lifetime value the right data project to pursue? There's a graph here of the product lifecycle. If you want an explanation of the product lifecycle, I recommend you read this link that's in the bottom right, or you go to the YouTube channel, watch the video, and I show some good examples that will help you really anchor what the product lifecycle is and why it's so important. But when you're in the growth phase and you're hitting that inflection point as you head towards maturity, where revenue is increasing, it's still increasing year over year, but it's not increasing at an increasing rate anymore. It's starting to increase at a decreasing rate. That's a good sign that it's time to make sure that you have a lifetime value metric that you're tracking and understanding, because you're leaving a lot of profit on the table at that moment. And that profit will eventually fall as you hit maturity and move into your death phase. I said that this is a useful metric across the whole brand. There are 4 critical use cases. They are optimizing the cost of customer acquisition. I know this is probably the one that drew most people in, but we've seen huge success in these other 3, especially the second, which is increasing high value sales conversions. There is a mentality in sales teams that everyone gets called. That is a bad mentality. because they're not all going to convert, and there are some that are much higher value. And so optimizing the sales efforts around both those leads that are most likely to convert and at the highest value is a fast way to increase revenue exponentially. The third, and this is really about long-term promises and payoffs, is developing product features that matter. So you might be listening to lots of people who come to your SaaS company and tell you exactly what to do and what they want to see in your product. And you might be designing features for people who bring you no value. And those features might even conflict with what the people who bring you value want to see in the product. And then the fourth, and this is a potentially contentious one, is prioritizing customer experience management. So some brands are doing this now where if you are a high value customer, you go right to the front of a phone queue. There are other ways to prioritize customer experience, like assigning case managers who handle high value customers, but treating everyone with respect, but making sure that you don't mess up anything for your highest value customers. So these are four really useful or really important use cases across the entire brand. And if you look at them, they also touch the different stages of the customer journey. Now, the reason that this is so important to understand who the highest value customers are is because of the Pareto principle. So this is out of economics. It's been validated very well in nature. There's a really interesting link here called the lazy ant study. Everybody believes that ants are really hardworking and industrious, and that's just because of Pixar propaganda. Most ants kind of wander around not doing much. And 20% of both beehives and ants will produce 80% of the outcomes. Marketing teams know this as the 80-20 rule, but this shows up everywhere. And if you start to look at your customer lifetime value, you will find that there is 1 in 5 customers that is responsible for 80% of the value that's coming into your brand. So what can go wrong with this metric? There's really 4 common pitfalls that derail lifetime value efforts. The first is overcoming a cold start. You don't have any data to go off of. But like I said, at the highest level, just take your revenue for the year, divide it by your customers, number of customers, and you have a general sense of what that average value is. But because of the Pareto principle, you shouldn't go just off of that average value.
Question for you, Luciano.
Yeah.
When you say that, I just want to make sure, when you say divide revenue by number of customers, you're saying revenue per customer by the customer, right? Is that?
No, I'm saying at the highest level, if all you know, well, you'd have to know it to file a tax return, is your total revenue for the year. And if you can figure out how many customers you've had within that calendar year, you can just divide those. You can just take the division of those two things, and it will give you a rough estimate of the average lifetime value of a customer in any one year. Then you can forward that out 5 years, 10 years. My point is that you don't have to have wonderful, clean, expansive data sets to start down this path. And this is where a lot of people fail. They say,
right,
but data to do this.
You're not going to be able to prioritize customers based on that metric, though.
Yes, absolutely not. That's why I said everyone here can leave and go do that calculation, and now you have a general sense of whether you need to head north, south, east, or west.
Okay, thank you. That's what I didn't understand. Thanks.
Yeah. The second problem, if you succeed in getting over the cold start issue, meaning you don't have data to begin with, is that you can't get to the individual level. This is a problem because if you think back to the Pareto principle, if you're just going off of average values, even if they're calculated with more refined detail than what I just said about total revenue divided by total number of customers, you won't be able to see the bimodality that's in your data, which means that there are some, the 1 in 5 high value customers that have a totally different characteristic to them. And you're just muddling those with everybody else that has very low value characteristics. So you really want to be able to get to that individual level. The third place that this usually fails is you get stuck on revenue. You have to start with revenue because, like I said, cost accounting is not typically very good within organizations, not to the level that's necessary for doing individual level cost assessments, but it should be the goal that you're heading towards over time. And then the fourth, and this is the one that I hear people a lot, like on LinkedIn, when I see people, I think it was Lucid that I just saw, posted a really great LinkedIn article. I think it was on LinkedIn. It might have been on their own blog about their lifetime value efforts. And one of the things I think they did very well was calling out the assumptions. You will have to make simplifying assumptions. It's just an inevitable part of modeling, any modeling, not just lifetime value. So understanding what those are and trying to correct them over time is really important, because those will sink you really fast, especially when things change very quickly. But ultimately, the best way to stay on track is just to test, validate, and repeat. So if you use the scientific method, you're demonstrating that you can reproduce and predict what someone's value is likely to be 1 year, 2 years, 5 years in the future. You track that data over time, and your models are turning out quite well, that's great. That's a lot of validation that you're on the right path. But another is that you should really approach this like a Bayesian. And the difference between a Bayesian and a frequentist when it comes to statistics is if you see a sudden change in your data, you don't assume that everything that you've known in the past is wrong and that from this point forward, you're just going to believe this new outcome. You're going to blend the two, everything you know with this new information, and keep doing that over time. That keeps you from chasing shiny things. So if you want to see a fully worked example, go to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Imperatos. Like I said, it's a 2-hour lecture. The first hour goes into far more detail with what I just covered. And then the second hour is just a case study. It links to all the documents. There's R code there. There are surveys that you can look at. It's everything that was done for the Digital Marketing Collective for their live event. It's a very simplistic problem. And so it's a very easy way to understand that approach of monetary, non-monetary, and future value calculation in lifetime value. Okay, so what we've just covered, like I said, it was drinking from a fire hose. We've defined lifetime value and all of its components. I've explained what lifetime value is, its use cases and common pitfalls, and I've linked you to a fully worked example that you can watch at another time for the Digital Marketing Collective. But another article that you might want to go read right after this is called CLV, and you'll see the difference, LTV and CLV. It's the same thing, customer lifetime value versus lifetime value, just two different abbreviations. But this article, The Only Metric That Matters, authored by Maycott of Pelosa, he really focuses on the idea of profit, which is great, and the entire relationship of the customer over time, what lifetime value tells you, how to break down disconnected data silos. That's one of the biggest obstacles in these projects. And then unifying that data operations into one metric that the entire brand can track. All right, I'm not sure if that was 12 minutes, but that was really close.
You nailed it.
Amazing. Okay, so right now we can just open it up to questions from the group. Just feel free to unmute yourself. Luciano, there are some questions in the chat. Also, keep the chat going if the group wants to talk or throw some questions down, but feel free to both verbally and put them in the chat.
Okay. I don't see the chat.
If you
There we go.
scroll over your screen, bottom
All right.
middle.
What is better to calculate LTV on profit versus revenue? For speed of an answer, go for revenue. For accuracy or precision, you're going to have to do profit. I mean, ultimately, I'm an economist and I don't have it tattooed across my back, but I'm thinking about it, about profitability being, it's actually the more important metric than lifetime value, because if it's built on profit, then that's ultimately all that matters in a market economy. And even if you're generating lots of revenue, if your costs are getting out of control, or you get into a situation like a cost accounting death spiral, where you start to look at your products and one product looks really bad, so you cut it, but that was also absorbing some of your fixed costs, and now the other products look bad, so you cut those. You can produce enough revenue to put yourself out of business if the costs aren't controlled. And you just won't see that without profitability. Hey, Daniel, it's good to see you. Actually, I think there's more than one former student on here. I saw Matt Hilburn on here as well. Do you have forecasting template that you use? So this is actually a really interesting question, Taylor, because I think that this is where I'm seeing activities that machine learning enthusiasts pursue that traditional econometricians would not do. And so they're using generalized linear models. And I think this is even true of the Lucid example that I saw. They're doing a lot of curve fitting, distribution fitting, and linear modeling for something that really should be utilizing ARIMA, which is autoregressive integrated moving average, which is a form of forecasting that's much better. Now, I think that they're going to get there, so I want to give them the benefit of the doubt here. But I think what you need to do is first find a calculation for lifetime value that works, and then you start to track that over time, and then you use that time version to predict into the future. That's not what they're doing. They're creating a value and then they're just predicting into the future. Still better than nothing, but ARIMA doesn't violate some of the assumptions that linear models do. And I think it was Lucid that even called this out. Like, they knew that this was something that was a simplifying assumption that they were making for the purpose of getting to an answer quickly. But as far as real forecasting goes, you should be looking at time series models, and ARIMA is really the king of those. All right.
So another question that just came up is Scott Paul's. Have you seen any examples of how to dial in your 80/20, basically find the best customers along
Yeah,
the
you just
same
have
lines?
to calculate the lifetime value, and then you just sort them. It's the top quintile. It's very simplistic. Once you've calculated the lifetime value, finding the 80/20 split is very simplistic. In fact, one of the most successful use cases of this that we have experienced with Imperatos was helping a mortgage company prioritize incoming leads for their sales outreach, which was mostly done by phone. They had previously just randomly called everybody. People would just go to their CRM, pull some leads, call them, and see what would happen. All we started doing was sorting those leads by highest value to lowest value and highest conversion to lowest conversion probability. And the last time that I checked in, because it is a deployed machine learning model at this point in production, they had passed the 50% conversion lift, and they were, I think it was about 53% lift in conversions just by doing that sorting.
I don't get how you sort. How do you pre-sort? How do you know their LTV?
You have to calculate the lifetime value at the individual level, and then you sort the customers by the lifetime value, highest to lowest.
But still, I thought these like raw leads with no data. How do you know? Like, are you saying they're repeat customers? So you have some existing data on them?
Yeah, so the different vendors, I think there were 7 different metrics that were unified across the different vendors. And what we used was the entirety of the customer journey and the lifetime value over the relationship to find the common characteristics of those leads according to those 7 metrics. And then it predicted, it's a typing tool, predicted their lifetime value as they were coming in, sorted them, and then put them back into the CRM. So when people pull up a lead, it's coming in an ordered fashion. Does that make sense?
I need to see it. I'm interested. I want to hear about this offline.
Okay.
We use that. My last life was in casinos. So if you go into casinos, you will see a lot of this type of lifetime value, because it's all about lifetime value. And I echo with Luciano's comment just right now, because you are able to go into, because you have the data from the past customers, then you will be able to identify the attributes of each customer, say, like age range, whatever. And then based on the data, you can predict and say, okay, if this customer that's coming in is, retired, live close by, don't have a job, and likes hot dogs, then they're going to sit there at the slot machine. And if they like to drink, boom, right there, that's the person who's going to get stuck. So if you evaluate that, you will be able to kind of bucket your customers in, a high level lifetime value buckets and say, 1 to 5 stars, right? Like based on the attributes, there's a higher probability for this person to become a 5-star. Then you can start to rank that. And then of course, like he said, when you refine your model, then you can kind of refine, even bucket it down to subcategories and just keep going from there. But high level, you need to be able to identify the attributes.
Yeah, marketing teams do this all the time. It's called lookalike modeling. So the key is
that's what I was thinking. I'm trying to understand if you were doing a lookalike. It sounded like there's a lead coming into a mortgage company, so you're collecting enough on that data on the incoming lead on that individual, and doing a lookalike modeling.
Yeah, it's a type of lookalike based on the other customers that have made it all the way through. And keep in mind, mortgage companies. Someone had mentioned this, I think, in a comment that I just scrolled by. I think this is about the pre-revenue. The type of market that you're in is going to determine a lot of this. So if you're a mortgage company, people buy a lot less frequently than someone who, like an e-commerce site that sells a million different kinds of products. And so you have to, and that all of that affects the time of your testing, so your validation windows, but it also means the length of your customer journey is a big consideration. So basically the steps are, you find monetary and non-monetary metrics that you can use. You create a baseline. You forecast that out in the future and you validate it as you go. You discount that value to the present and you say, okay, these customers with these characteristics on these known metrics are our highest value. What leads that are coming in on 5 or 7 metrics look like these high value? That's the best that you can do because you don't have the other data yet. And this is true with marketing teams. They have the least amount of data.
Luciano, I posted a question about fixed versus variable cost?
Let me go find it.
Yeah, and I see how fixed costs can really confuse this calculation because most corporate fixed costs are incurred not necessarily through customer support activities.
Right.
And, if variable costs can be identified directly to the customer value, I would think it's a more accurate number, but you may already have addressed this. Can you speak to that, please?
Sure. So the fixed cost issue diminishes over time. So usually because fixed costs are an upfront expense, the more business that you're starting to do, those start to fall very quickly. The best thing that you can do, or the best case of dealing with fixed costs, is to do a attribution component. So if you have, like call centers are a good example. They're really looked at as just a cost of business. But you can track who is calling and when they're calling and how long that they're utilizing your call center's time. And you can start to portion off the fixed costs to individual customers, a fraction of it. It's very fractional. But if you've been in operation, if this is not a pre-revenue, like another one of the questions, or you are not in that early adoption phase, but you've already hit growth and you're heading into maturity, the fixed costs are going to usually be a very, very small component, just because the way fixed costs work over time, of the total costs that you want to assign to an individual customer. Most of those will turn out to be variable costs.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So there was this question about what do you do with pre-revenue? You do competitive intelligence. This is the part of overcoming the cold start problem. There is so much information out there right now. Again, if you're a competitor with Lucid, you can go find out exactly how Lucid is doing their lifetime value calculations. You can even find the range of values in some of their data that they've put out there. There are ways to look at industries or sectors or even do customer research through surveys to start to approximate this. You do not have to have giant data sets to start figuring this out. And precision ultimately is going to be, when you talk about brands that are really mature, they think about things in EBITDA, right? Fractions of pennies. But because of the scale, that turns into huge amounts of money. That kind of precision is necessary at the maturity stage. When you're going into the market the first time, you just don't want to be off by too much in how you're pricing. And so anything that you can do from a research standpoint to narrow that down to something that has a tolerance of anything like 30 to 40% precision, that's going to put you in a much better position than most brands who just put it out there and churn and burn until they can figure it out and refine it over time. Taking the lazy route. Oh, why would you do that when the hard stuff is so much fun? You get all the frustration of hard stuff. Are there any decent dashboards or tool that automate data collection processes? So for e-commerce, there are some tools. There are so many, I don't even know which one to recommend at this point. As far as dashboards, I don't know of dashboards that are built specifically for lifetime value. I know Domo will calculate it for you if you have the data and put that into one of their dashboards. I know Grow will do the same thing. I've seen Grow's blog articles on their lifetime value tracking. You might want to check them out. But it depends on what your data is. And keep in mind, if you're an e-commerce company, they're just going to pipe in your e-commerce sales. None of your cost data is going to be in there. None of your non-monetary costs is going to be in there. And very few of them do any sort of forecasting that I would trust. So the best thing to do would be build a portion of your own data warehouse, move the relevant variables into that data warehouse in an automated fashion, and then build a dashboard with something like Power BI or Tableau on top of it yourself and refine it over time. It's not as much work as I think you might think it is.
No, we did it at Venice MD. We just had our FP&A team up with the data science team. And we just built our little, it's not even as big as Progressive Leasing when we did our own SQL server. We just put it on AWS and just pull in the necessary data in there and just start modeling and put it on Power BI and create our own dashboard. And it's like you said, it's a scientific method, right? Just get something out there and start refining it and test it and just keep going with that.
Yeah, there's a phrase that we use all the time. Perfection is the enemy of progress.
Oh yeah.
If you are hoping that your first iteration is going to nail it down to the penny level, you're going to be very heartbroken. But if you can get it to within $100 in your first pass or $1,000 in your first pass, and that represents 10% of the overall value, you can refine from that very quickly. So Hallie, I think, am I saying that right, Hallie?
Yes.
What color is your parachute is a workbook that ties lookalike approaches. That is a awesome book written by R.L. Stine, the Goosebumps author. He wrote that book too.
Yeah.
And
Another one that I love.
go ahead. Another one that you love?
There you are. Hi. Another one that I like is called Guerrilla Tactics in the Job Market. So being a rehab doctor is a wonderful alternate reality to what you're talking about, because I'm coming from a different perspective of how to make that end user the person who needs to figure out how to shift their own gears. And so the data acquisition and the spreadsheet modeling, I'm fascinated by it. I'd love to learn more about how I could make that work in my sector and vice versa. So Strong Campbell Interest Inventory, or now it's a different name, from Pearson Testing is an example of a way that you can just fill in different bubbles and you get to see, Luciano and others, how your interests, like, dislike, or for if you like gardening versus tinkering with pulling a motor apart and putting it back together. You're more likely to find people in your professional world with whom you have affinity if you have a similar set of answers to theirs. And that's how a lot of career guidance counselors help you to figure out and then tie it together with a book or workbook like What Color is Your Parachute, to being able to see the 6 different sectors of job definitions that then are codified typically into 3 different codes. So if you're more entrepreneurial, you're more likely to have a certain mindset or approach from someone who's a police officer. And those are different ways of designating your career path. So you can start using algorithmic modeling to also fit together with any number of different applications besides a business-like manner.
So
Yeah.
I think we've got time for maybe one more question, Luciano. Bill Park put one into the chat. Can you touch on the pros and cons of using ACV/churn rate as a shortcut to LTV and ways to correct?
Luciano, I guess what I commonly see in DEX is management teams take their annual contract value and divide it by their current churn rate. And they want to tell you a customer is going to last for 5 years and it's going to come up with some value based on the ACV. So just, I don't know if you're familiar with that or if you.
Yeah, and I would immediately attack it on the basis of the Pareto principle, because not all of those customers are equal.
Yeah.
Like, you can't stop, 50% of churn cannot be stopped. People die, you can't stop that. People close their business, you can't stop that. There are a lot of reasons that churn happens that are not within your control. So first and foremost, churn needs to be divided out into the portions that are the result of activities from the brand versus uncontrollable activities from the customer. And then within that, you need the additional precision of, I don't care how many necessarily churn. What I really care is when we lose the 1 in 5 that's worth 80% of our revenue, that person, it takes 4 other people to even come close. They're going to bring in 20%. So you're talking about 16 other people to equal the same level. So churn by itself, these are I've seen these metrics in DEX. I think the people who put them in assume that the people who are looking for metrics want to see this.
Yeah.
And I don't think the two sides are actually talking about what matters to either of them.
Yeah. No.
But as far as any metric that's every single metric that you calculate at least has the potential to offer you something really interesting. And I do want to touch real fast just on one other question that Brian had, which was about hearing how this affects nonprofits, because we're back to the issue of profitability. We do a lot of work with credit unions, and they are technically a not-for-profit organization. There is this false sense in the current environment that profit is somehow this awful, evil, terrible thing. And from a mathematical modeling standpoint in economic theory, if you say to somebody, well, should we minimize our costs? They will absolutely say, yeah, we should do that. That would be a good thing. We'll be efficient. We'll be environmentally friendly. we should be optimizing our costs. That is no different mathematically than generating profit. It's the same activity. So in the case, you see this really dramatically with nonprofits. If they can reduce their costs and create more profitability, that allows them to provide better services to the groups that they are servicing. So this is true with credit unions. They can offer better services to their members. This is true for brands. You can pay out the dividends and profit to your owners, but you can also reinvest it and you can outcompete your competitors. You can improve your products. By being smart about profit, which includes those cost considerations, you can be a better brand. You don't have to just pay it all out to investors. And that's a short-term, that is a short-term gain for a long-term problem, because eventually someone else is going to come in, figure out more cost-effective ways to offer better services, and they're going to steal all of your customers.
Thanks, Luciano. I think we're close on time for Midday Connect, but if any of you said that,
Thanks, everyone.
thank you.
Guys.